I would like to read more classic novels. Now, I feel like I've read a decent selection of classic novels. I've read books like Castle of Otranto, Alice in Wonderland, Wuthering Heights, Frankenstein, Northanger's Abbey, and Lord of the Flies. Look how cool this copy of Lord of the Flies is. It's got like the ridged edges. I find that more often than not, I gravitate towards newer novels. This is probably because they're easier to read and are the product of just years and years of refining the medium of books and literature. This is all similar to film. It's like watching a silent film and then watching a more modern film. Both works are great works and culturally significant, but modern film have perfected the pacing for the audience that it's presenting to. With all this being said, there are so many classic novels I want to experience. I feel that it's important that I build my reading repertoire, as well as just experience different structures and formats that were built in old novels that are utilized in my favorite novels today. Like anything else, you need to practice your reading ability. And in this case, I just need to train my social media terrible retention time so that I can sit down and read through these classics. To do this, I want to start small with a novel called... I've been wanting to read this book for a while, and I got it for like $3 from one of my local bookstores. So I think now is the perfect opportunity to read that. In Florida for the weekend. Let's go! I brought H.G. Wells' The Time Machine with me, which, you know, should be a good beach read. H.G. Wells so far in this novel has introduced a lot of interesting scientific and theoretical ideas. How we often exclude the fourth dimension, which is time, and how most humans interact with the world on a 2D plane and have to use tools to move into an upward or downward direction. That we just need a tool to be able to maneuver into this fourth dimension, with most of it involving the title of this book, the Time Machine. I'm only halfway through this book right now, and I've been reading it a lot slower than I usually do. I just feel like I want to take time reading the text, and it's really not that long, so I can afford to spend more time with the text. H.G. Wells stresses the unpleasantness of time travel, as well as I feel like this novel is like weirdly reminiscent of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, especially in its scientific presentation, as well as it uses an external perspective that basically looks into the madness of the scientist. In this case, the time traveler is talking to a group of like journalists and reporters and talking about his experience with the time machine. This also is very interesting because H.G. Wells utilizes this story setup to basically switch between the time traveler's first-person perspective and then our outside character's perspective as well. And it kind of adds this nice transition between the two because he's speaking to our main character, which I don't think has a name. I don't know, it's just something cool that I noticed. I just finished The Time Machine. It was a good book. The story is both simple yet complex. By this I mean it's simple in its story structure but complex in its ideas. In its structure, H.G. Wells follows the frame story structure, which is basically just a story in a story. The story itself is simple. It's basically just a stranger in a strange land as he explores a futuristic version of our world filled with new and different languages and people who are completely vegetarian. This is kind of a fun juxtaposition though, because it's kind of different than our ideas of the future. We often see a humanity where we're flourishing and we're coming up with new mechanical advancements that include like flying cars. In this world he creates, it kind of goes in the opposite direction. Where a lot of the complexity and depth comes from is the heavy undertones of H.G. Wells' political thinkings and social critiques. In the book, humanity has basically evolved into two different classes. The Eloi being the high class and the Morlocks being the working class. The Eloi are the first people the time traveler runs into, and he says many of their first questions were on the level of like a fifth grader. Quote unquote asking the time traveler if he was from the sun. H.G. Wells states that intelligence is sprung from necessity, and this book houses a world where H.G. Wells' version of communism succeeds, basically eliminating intelligence's necessity. The time traveler also experiences the end of the world and watches as all life basically freezes away. Also throughout this book, he brings up early ideas of global warming, often noting that the planet that he's inhabiting feels a lot hotter than the one he's used to. Also talking about heat and fire, I found it very interesting when he brought up the idea that without mankind, fire would be almost absent from the natural world, and that a lot of fire is the product of mankind. I don't know, that's just really interesting to me. Now, the title of this video is probably how to read more classic novels, and here's my advice on that. Like anything else, you have to ease your way into reading classic novels. You have to train your brain to read the books in the style of language that they used while writing them. These books were written a long time ago, and like everything else, language has evolved. Nowadays, we use different word formations, and even just pacing as a whole is completely different. And my advice would be just read more short books. Not every book you read has to be this 800-page masterpiece like The Great Expectation. In terms of classics, this is a perfect book to start with. This was H.G. Wells' first publication, and it was written in 1895. Considering when this book was written, it doesn't have a lot of the same difficulties of language that I noticed in a lot of other classics. Specifically with the absence of the slow pacing, I feel like this book, a lot of its difficulty comes from its philosophical ideas rather than its words and sentences actually being difficult. Honestly, it was just a really fun book to read, and I can see how so many different sci-fi books all stem from the ideas of this book. All of the multiverse stuff all kind of originates from this book a little bit. I'm looking at all of the different Marvel movies and Everything Everywhere All at Once. I also like the idea that the main character has control of time, but time still technically doesn't wait for him because he is still a part of his own timeline, and that time will always be moving forward, so he technically can't escape time even though he has a time machine that allows him to move through time. I don't know, it's an interesting idea. All I know is that I'm really excited to check out The War of the Worlds next, and it is also not that long, only being 202 pages.
God.
For context, Cameron's getting a haircut.
And they only take cash.
I might only take cash. Or checks. Boss man hooked me up.